Writers are the backbone of a movie or a show, and being a writer myself, I know how hard of a job this is. So just imagine if you're a writer for a TV series that has so much potential to become one of the greatest ones. You'd probably do your best to make it right. But if your basic demands are not met, then would you really care about the show after all? Well, this is a really serious issue for TV series writers. If the pressure is high and they're not paid properly, it eventually hurts the prospects of the show they're working on. Something like this has happened to a lot of famous shows, and one of them was the 2006 NBC show Heroes, which is still considered a great missed opportunity. In today's video, I'll talk about both the rise and the fall of Heroes, so let's get started. Many of y'all who haven't watched this series ever in your life might wonder why this generic kind of superhero show was such a big deal. Isn't it everywhere now? So let me tell you guys. First of all, the year was 2006, years before MCU was a thing. It was a time when the general audience wasn't very exposed to superhero shows. So when NBC brought Heroes, written and produced by Tim Kring, the show was a fresh, out-of-the-box kind of story. It was an ongoing story about how some ordinary people from all over the world gained supernatural powers. And the most amazing thing about it was that they were all interconnected, much like the structure of another legendary TV show, Lost. Two of the writers and executive producer, Jeff Loeb and Jesse Alexander, who worked on Lost, also co-wrote for Heroes. And that's why I always find some similarities between these shows. Heroes slowly develops these interconnections among the characters, and that's what really changed the audience perception of how superhero stories can be more than just action movies. Yes, Heroes was inspired by comics, and there were many common ideas borrowed from Marvel and DC, but the execution of these storylines felt raw and original. For the first time, a superhero show made these ordinary looking characters very special for the audience. Yeah, Heroes might not be my personal favorite TV show, but characters like Masioka's Hiro Nakamura and Hayden Panettiere's Claire Bennett, the cheerleader, are still some of my favorite characters from that era. I mean, I don't think Gen Z would follow, but some of y'all must have heard the super famous dialogue of the series, "Save the cheerleader, save the world." I can remember those who didn't even watch this series used to quote it every time to act cool. Each episode of the first season earned 14 million views, and was also nominated for an Emmy and a Golden Globe. They even won People's Choice Awards for a new TV drama. In just a matter of time, people began to write about the show, interview the cast, making them globally known for their iconic performances. More and more follow-ups through the comic books, web episodes, and even games were brought into the market. So everything was going exceptionally well until the second season arrived and became the ultimate game changer for the show, in a very bad way. The buzz around the show suddenly dropped off after the plot and the characters began to lose their weight in the second season. First of all, season 2 wasn't even the entire season it was supposed to be. The main reason was the Writers Guild of America strike, which ran from November 2007 to February 2008. Writers were underpaid because their payment wasn't very dated. It didn't include the internet. Even though there was digital distribution, writers were excluded from their cut. So the strike was inevitable. It ran for 100 days, and finally the issues were addressed and the strike was over. But by then, the damage to shows like Heroes was already done. Production on Heroes and many other series stalled. Season 2 was planned to be a 24-episode series with 3 different chapters: Generations, Exodus, and Villains. Instead, they just had to fit the whole season into one chapter, Generations. So as usual, the plot was rushed, and it was a whole mess for the series. The Exodus chapter was entirely written out, and they thought to make Villains the next arc for the third season. But the mistake was that Exodus actually held the majority of the show, and losing it ultimately ruined its future. You wouldn't imagine that for a series in 2007. Some great plot points could have changed everything. For example, the virus apocalypse, which was initially meant to destroy the world in season 2, was very poorly handled and almost hurriedly finished due to the writer's strike. And then came the introduction of new characters at such a dire time when the audience's expectations were already hurt. Overstuffed subplots, each episode dealing with a forced romantic tension between characters, and the villainous comebacks, I still believe, weren't always necessary to the plot. What else could you even expect? Because of the strike, there was clearly a lack of substance in season 2, and the existing writers just desperately filled that gap with unnecessary things that didn't even pay off by the end. However, fans still held their expectations for the third and fourth seasons, and honestly, I watched the third season of the show, but I just had to tell myself enough is enough. We were all drawn to the show because in season 1, the characters had a crisp goal in their arc, but in season 3, they just made even more crap out of them. Characters began to stop making sense after all, like Claire Bennett's cheerleader arc was completely ruined. The whole show was based on the idea of save the cheerleader, save the world. When in an episode of season 3, Claire Bennett's character became completely useless after Sylar stole her power by cutting her head open. I mean, Sylar was already an unbeatable superhero, and Claire, on the other hand, was the anchor for the whole series. She was the essential one to the story. So it was a very pointless development in the middle of the show. show. Personally, there was no point left for me to continue the show, but I did it anyway. Writers were back in the office again, and the strike was over. But there were some fundamental issues about this show. The production house intervention was another thing, because when initially Tim Kring thought the next seasons wouldn't bring back the early antagonist, the studio heads asked him specifically to reconsider this decision. And many of the previous antagonists were back again the next season, like Sylar, whose character transformation got irritating at some point. Zachary Quinto was a phenomenal actor, and there's no doubt about that. The whole show literally made his career at the time. But his constant shifts between hero and villain really confused a lot of us. Kring, in the meantime, was himself a part of the writer's strike, so you can imagine the amount of pressure he had to deal with. He wasn't at all happy with this decision, as he later expressed his feelings that he should have stuck to his own ideas about the show. Finally, the third and fourth seasons could no longer revive their past glory. Season 3 averaged around 7.5 million viewers, and Season 4 dealt with even fewer. So we all kinda knew it was high time for them to wrap it up. After a hasty ending of the fourth season, Season 5 was finally cancelled. Still, they're not yet ready to say goodbye. In 2015, the producers launched a spin-off series, Heroes Reborn. Their goal was to revive the show once again to see if they could bring back the initial audience. But you know, nostalgia bait doesn't really work if there's no actual material in the show. And Heroes Reborn lacked the material in a real sense. I mean, I tried to give it a watch, but what the hell was that? As I said, there is something sinisterly wrong with Heroes, because they just end up messing with the plot by overcomplicating it. They could have just restarted with a simple plot, simple characterizations of a few characters, or most importantly, brought back the original characters to at least, you know, get back its lost fan base. Instead, there were little cameos as a consolation prize, which really upset the fans. Even nostalgia bait was so poorly executed that people didn't even watch it for old time's sake. By the end of Heroes Reborn, one thing was clear to me. The showrunners didn't really care about these characters or the fans at all. While some critics called it average, others had repeatedly bashed it throughout. I think people still remember Heroes Season 1 as a standalone series, when in fact it wasn't actually standalone. Heroes meant a lot to the 2006 viewers who were about to experience superhero narratives for the first time, and that too with such nuance. Trust me, if you give it a watch, I mean just Season 1, you'd like it too. Of course, you might feel it's very common now because of the number of superhero movies that came out in the 2010s, especially after the MCU took over. But this one was something fresh and daunting for its time, especially for its inclusivity, which stunned audiences worldwide. The writer's strike and the pay disparity made a lot of good writers leave the show in the middle, and that's why even after the strike, the show lost its charm. Heroes was a tragic fall from a huge potential because of nothing but poor treatment, and it's a warning for modern-day writers and showrunners, especially as it became more relevant during the 2023 writer's strike. Anyway, Heroes and its spin-off are both available on Apple TV and Amazon, depending on your country and region, so check it out if you really want to. On that note, our video is over. If you used to be a fan of this show, we're on the same page, so please let us know your feelings about the show in the comments. Also, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you in the next one.